Welcome to this webinar on NATO enlargement. We are discussing the cases of Finland, Sweden, and Ukraine. As you know, right after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was a lot of concern in the Baltic states about their own security, and they made some historic changes in their neutrality, traditional neutrality, and they applied to become members of NATO. And Turkey had reservations about especially Finland and Sweden's memberships. The three countries signed an agreement to assure Turkey about the terrorism, counterterrorism measures and terrorist activities throughout Europe, but especially in Sweden and Finland. Finland just recently became a member, satisfying Turkey's concerns. Sweden is still waiting, perhaps before July it can join if it satisfies what Turkey is asking for. And then there's a lot of debate in Washington about Ukraine's membership as well. That seems to be a sort of more difficult case. It doesn't look like it will happen very soon, but that is also being debated. So today, we want to discuss what NATO enlargement means for the Western Alliance, for relations with Russia, and what are Turkey's concerns. Joining me today from Wilson Center is Ambassador James Jeffrey. You all know him. He doesn't need much of an introduction. From Ankara, SETA Foundation's General Coordinator, Burhanettin Duran, our boss, I should say. He's joining us. Thank you for both joining us. And then Kilic Kanat is our research director at SETA Washington. He will be also commenting and debating these issues with our guests. I appreciate you all joining us today on Zoom. Please use the chat button, Q&A button to pose your questions, and we will make sure to get to them all during this session. Professor Duran, actually, I want to start with you. Can you briefly tell us what Turkey's concerns were regarding Finland and Sweden, and what happened? Why is now Finland accepted into the alliance, and what's holding up Sweden's membership from the Turkish perspective, from Ankara's perspective?
Thank you, Kadir, for making this panel available, because Turkey's position regarding NATO, regarding Finland's and Sweden's membership to NATO has been so much discussed, and it's a hot issue. And after the Finland's membership to NATO, now it's Sweden, the case for Sweden, but what will be the Turkey's position, and what are the parameters of this new membership or conditions for Turkey? These are the critical issues. Let me briefly explain Turkey's position on NATO's enlargement. As our all colleagues would know, that Turkey has been supporting, historically has been supporting open door policy and NATO's enlargement in the Eastern Europe. And that was the reality since the end of the Cold War, I mean in the 1990s and 2000s. And this process continued until 2008, when there was the discussion of Georgia's and Ukraine's potential membership to NATO. And Turkey always supported in these cases. And it means that Turkey considers NATO's enlargement at three levels as important. One is, of course, the national security level, Turkey is considering NATO alliance as very central in its security and defense policies. There is no discussion about, there is no question about that. And the second one is, of course, this military operations. Turkey is participating in each humanitarian and military operations, and that is very important for Turkey at the level of democratic and liberal values. So this is the second level. And in the third level, Turkey is also supporting NATO's enlargement in such a great uncertainty at such a time. I mean, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the world is experiencing a new reality, and people are talking about the new Cold War, the competition between US and China, and the possible effects of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, to international system. In such a turmoil, Turkey, of course, supports NATO's enlargement process. But for the specific cases of Finland and Sweden, for Turkey's position is such that as an ally, Turkey is very open to this enlargement process. But still, if there is an enlargement, this would meet the needs and urgent, of course, security needs of the allies. In this case, Turkey, in the Madrid memorandum, showed the willingness to participate, to accept the participation of Finland and Sweden. But of course, there were some conditions for the fulfillment of Turkey's security considerations about PKK and FETA issues. And these were agreed in the Madrid memorandum, but at that time, Turkey's position for Finland and Sweden at the beginning was different. These two countries insisted that this process should be processed together. But for the Finland case, Turkey ratified the membership. On April 4, Finland has become the 31st member of the NATO alliance. But for the Sweden case, there are some problems, there are some conditions or promises that are not met by the Sweden government. Maybe for domestic reasons, but still they didn't meet the promises that they made us in this memorandum. So, as a principle, Turkey is for Sweden's membership, but with the condition that these security issues of PKK and FETA are met. This is the case about Finland and Sweden. Kadir, would you let me talk about the Ukraine issue, or we will talk later?
Let's come back to that. Let's stick to Turkey's position for now. And I want to get Ambassador's comments, and then we can start discussing Ukraine as well after Kilic's comments. Ambassador.
First of all, thank you for having me on. It's a very, very important subject, and it's quite important not only for the three countries we're talking about, Finland, Sweden, and Ukraine, but for three other countries that are critical in this discussion, namely Turkey, the United States, and Russia. We'll leave aside Ukraine, but let me make a few preliminary comments. First of all, as is well known by Turks and most people in NATO, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has established a new, in a negative sense, bookmark in the history of the 20th and 21st century. This is the first time since 1945 we have had such a development, throwing into question all of the collective security and global progress that the world generally, with some exceptions, has made since that time. Thus, it is a very, very important issue. NATO states with the United States and Turkey taking leading positions, have responded accordingly. The Swedish and Finnish accession, as we just heard, is a response to this. But the Turkish negotiations raise another important issue that is not always understood in Washington, but certainly is in Turkey, and that is that Turkey is not only a frontline state with Russia and has been a frontline state with Russia for 400 years, Turkey also has other security concerns in its near abroad. It faces an extremely unstable situation in its three southern neighbors, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And it faces a both domestic and external threat in the PKK. And that, along with concerns about the Gulenist movement, but particularly the PKK and the instability in the south, are going to influence Turkey's security decisions. And they have in the case of Sweden and Finland. Particularly in the case of Sweden, it was notorious for its support and has been notorious for its support for the PKK in particular, while officially declaring it a terrorist organization like many other European countries. It has been extremely accommodating to fellow travelers of the PKK and very, very critical of Turkey. Now, a lot of that has changed as the Swedes are beginning to face the fact that Russia is a true security concern of theirs, and Turkey or the PKK or anything else down on the other side of the Black Sea are far less important. So Sweden is proceeding, as we just heard, it's proceeding far more slowly than Finland. It's clear that Sweden is going to wait until after the elections to see if it can get a better deal in terms of how it will carry out the trilateral agreement. I don't think there will be any change in the trilateral MOU. I think that it will stay. I think that it will be a question of interpretation with Sweden. The Swedes want to get into NATO. They don't want to get into NATO as much as the Finns do, because the Finns have had a different experience with Russia. One in which they fought the Winter War in 1940, initially very successfully. The impact to NATO of Finland joining the alliance is extremely important, and it is extremely beneficial to Turkey. It means that Russia faces to its north one of the largest armies in Europe in NATO, other than the Turkish or the American. Counting reserves, and they're well trained, the Finnish military counts well over 300,000 people that can be activated immediately with one of the largest fleets of tanks, fighter aircraft and such in Europe, a large border with Russia. Look, it gets back to 19th century geopolitics, but it means that Russia now has to worry very much about that flank. What was a NATO vulnerability, three small countries, the Baltics, which Russia had historical, although illegitimate claims to, were hanging out there with a big question of how do we defend them. Now we have the Finnish military to the north, and this creates all kinds of military, but also geopolitical opportunities. Because remember, Finland, like Austria, was made neutral as part of the post-World War II global and European order. And they took that very, very seriously. In fact, there's a word in English, Finlandization, which means moving from being part of the West to a neutral position. Thus, it was a very, very serious step by the Finns to do this. And it underlines the fact that we are dealing in a new world. This is very important. It certainly is very important for Mr. Macron to get this. He sometimes seems not to. It's important for the Germans to get this. I cannot underline how important this is for thinking about the long-term relationship with Russia. I'm not a pessimist on that. I think, in fact, when we talk about Ukraine, we can be perhaps a little bit more predictive in how this whole thing is going to go. But any healthy relationship with Russia has to begin with the fact that Russia has broken all of the rules, and that the future relationship with Russia, good or bad, will have to take that into consideration. The Finns have done a huge service by deciding to come into NATO. Turkey has earned a lot of respect and approval in Washington by taking that step. Now, Sweden is important as well, in part because it has an effective military, but it doesn't have a border with Russia, and it won't have, and it doesn't have, while it's been long neutral, it doesn't have the same official neutral status that Finland, like Austria, did. So it is less impactful. It's also important, and there will be pressure on Turkey and also on Sweden, but particularly on Turkey after the election to get moving on this. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ambassador. Kilic, I want to turn to you. We are not in the Q&A session, but there's already a question about Turkey's. The question is Erdogan's opposition to Sweden's NATO membership more for domestic politics or out of a genuine security concern? If you want, you can address this question, but I want to get your general assessment on what has been said already. James Jeffrey said, Finland's membership actually is beneficial directly for Turkey as well.
I think two different things. Number one, Turkey's concern about PKK and Western countries' support for the organization has been going on for a long time now, and it has been one of the main issues between US-Turkey relations. Not the PKK issue, but US support for YPG has been a significant problem in US-Turkey relations for a long period of time. So it is independent of the elections. I think it is an important issue. And it is something about the party lines in Turkey, especially when it comes to PKK. And the public opinion polls even demonstrated that a large majority of the Turkish people were against Sweden's membership to NATO if Sweden doesn't fulfill the conditions that was put forward by Turkey. So it is not something that is related to, in my opinion, to the election next month. I think it is an issue, a very legitimate security concern, which was also expressed by NATO Secretary General in multiple different instances, being Turkey being the country that faced the most terrorist attacks in the last 30 years. I think it was a genuine legitimate concern instead of being an instrument for domestic politics right now. And I think the second issue here is the NATO accession process can be quite long for many countries. And I think we have to understand that this process, especially the Finland's process, has been, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the shortest process of membership. They applied for the membership in May, and now it is like only 10 months, 11 months, they become member. We have seen examples of countries waiting for years for some technicalities, for some issues with other countries. So I think there has been criticism for Turkey for delaying that. It has been an unfair criticism, given the security concern of Turkey, especially in regards to PKK, has been very legitimate here. And the third one, I guess, after the Finland's membership, this has demonstrated that Turkey continuing, because when Turkey had some conditions for Finland and Sweden, many consider Turkey's actions and try to describe Turkey's actions an action against NATO's enlargement as a whole. But in multiple different instances, Turkish foreign policy makers expressed that they continue the open door policy, but they have certain conditions that these two countries has to meet. And after Finland's membership ratification in Turkish parliament, I think those criticism also needs to stop. That means Turkey, and considering that Finland has been as Ambassador just mentioned, Finland's membership has been more important right now for NATO and Finland itself. I guess that criticism that Turkey is trying to stop NATO's enlargement and acting against NATO because we have seen articles in the last couple of months that there was even suggestions that Turkey should be kicked out from NATO. So all of those criticisms turn out to be wrong. Turkey ratified Finland's membership, and if Sweden meet those conditions, Turkey will ratify Sweden's membership as well. And of course, again, I have to mention that the PKK issue, the significance sometimes in Washington, many doesn't understand the significance of the PKK issue for Turkish public in general. And the fact that it is about the party lines, it is not an AK Party or Erdogan issue. It has been a struggle that has been going on, the fight against terrorism going on for the last 30 years, more than 30 years actually. So it is a sensitive topic, and pushing Turkey, trying to pressure Turkey to accept Sweden's membership before Sweden fulfills those criteria and conditions by Turkey will increase the public reaction, at least the public reaction against those countries in Ankara, in Istanbul, and in Turkey in general.
Thank you very much, Kilic, for explaining how Turkey thinks about NATO enlargement. Professor Duran, I want to turn to you. As Kilic mentioned, Turkey actually stated again in the wake of the recent Finland's accession to NATO that they support open door policy. In the past, we know they supported Georgia's membership. They supported Ukraine's membership in the past. Now they've approved Finland, and they don't seem to be ideologically opposed to Sweden's membership either. It's just that Sweden has to meet some criteria. When you look at the Ukraine situation, and given this background of Turkey being for NATO enlargement, but at the same time pursuing a policy of balance between Ukraine and Russia, how do you see potential for Ukraine's membership? Of course, this is the war is still going on, and Turkey actually supported Ukraine by through various means in a very strong way actually, and never accepted Crimea's takeover by Russians. So, but at the same time, Turkey supports NATO enlargement. How does Turkey think about managing that relationship with Russia while also supporting NATO enlargement in this way?
Thank you, Kadir. As you mentioned in your question, Turkey has very good relations with Ukraine, and in terms of support given to Ukraine by Turkey is sometimes misunderstood or sometimes understated. Yes, Turkey is trying to have a position of speaking to both sides, both Russia and Ukraine, in this crisis. But at the same time, Turkey's position in terms of Russian invasion of Ukraine, including Crimea, is very certain. And also Turkey's support at different levels to Ukraine and cooperation are very critical. And that's why Turkey is supporting, of course, Ukraine's membership to NATO. But when there is this war continuing, in this case, without ending the war, is there a possibility of having Ukraine as member to NATO? This is a challenge, actually, not for Turkey, but also for the NATO alliance. As far as I remember, there is no such an accession while a country is in a war. This is basically a problem. But as principle, Turkey, of course, supports the Ukrainian membership. Now we have another issue, that how to handle the European security architecture after this Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is a very big challenge, and there should be some security arrangements for both ending the war and also both satisfying some security needs of Ukraine and Russia at the same time. Yes, I know that in Washington or in some European capitals, Russia is demonized in a way that as if this war will continue for years. But for the security reasons, it doesn't seem reasonable to continue with this threat for years. There should be an end to this war. Of course, diplomacy should be at work. But sometimes when I speak to my Western colleagues, I cannot find enough response from them how to end this war and to make more secure European landscape, European continent. So, of course, in this case, Russian invasion is unacceptable, and there is such effort to make this war ending. But what about the international impacts of this war? Well, the relationship between China and Russia is deepening, seems to be deepening, and China is taking the advantage of this war and making a kind of Russia. I know that this word could be understood as somehow derogatory, but China is taking Russia somehow as proxy, you know, or let's say China is taking the advantage of this war in facing the US and in promoting their interests. So the question is here is that how can we continue this war for years without making some without having some detrimental effects on the European and Western security arrangements? Of course, firstly, NATO. So there should be a balance in confronting this issue. So Turkey is, of course, trying to mediate between Russia and Ukraine to end this war. And the grain deal corridor is one step for this. But unless there is a strong diplomatic will to end this war in a way that both satisfying Ukrainian and Russian security interests, this will continue make so much problems, create problems for all of us, of course, for our NATO alliance.
Thank you, Professor Duran. Ambassador, I want to turn to you about Ukraine again. How does Washington see potential membership for Ukraine? Because this is a country that has waited for so long, and as Kilic indicated, Finland and Sweden have sought fast-track membership. In Finland's case, it got it under a year, I believe, or just over a year. And Sweden this summer might happen if they satisfy Turkey's concerns. And then Ukraine has, paid a heavy price for coming closer to the West, to Europe. How do you, and Washington has been a big supporter of Ukraine's war against, resistance against Russia. What would you say about potential membership for Ukraine along the way?
Thank you. And first of all, Burhanettin Bey, we consider you a Western colleague as well, not just the people you talk to, okay? But you raise a very, very important point. Any consideration of Ukraine being in NATO has to be in the context of the resolution of this conflict and a stable security architecture that encompasses not just Ukraine, but Russia and all NATO states. While he often gets things wrong, President Macron, in emphasizing this, is basically on to something. It's something that is being considered here in Washington. And Turkey, of course, by playing an intermediary role while making clear that it is supporting fully and very effectively Ukraine's struggle for independence, is also in that position. and it's very interesting, and it gets back to in terms of Turkey, Finland. One of the arguments that people made initially when Turkey blocked Finland and Sweden was that this was being done to please Putin because he sells a lot of gas and buys a lot of tomatoes and sends a lot of tourists to and from Turkey. But in fact, if Turkey wanted to please Russia, it would have let Sweden in and kept Finland out, because the far bigger blow militarily and diplomatically and geostrategically to Russia of the two is Finnish NATO accession, not Sweden. But rather, Turkey made clear that its real reason, and that's become now very clear, is primarily the PKK issue. And that's understandable for those of us that have lived, not just in my case in Turkey, but also in Iraq and at times in Syria. So to get back to Ukraine, a little bit of history. The United States, almost alone, with the exception of some Eastern European countries, supported Georgia and Ukraine coming in at the Bucharest NATO summit in 2008. The rest of NATO was officially in favor of all states who wanted to join NATO coming into NATO, because that's a general position, and the general position that, and this goes back to the 1975 Helsinki Final Accords, that countries can decide their own security arrangements, security alliances, and other countries cannot influence them. So those are important principles, not just for NATO, but also for the CSCE, now OSCE, nobody wanted to deviate from them in principle. In practice, there was real resistance to giving NATO membership to Ukraine and Georgia, partially for military reasons. It's very hard to get there in a crisis to either place, and we have seen this both in 2008 in Georgia, in the Georgia War, and now in Ukraine. And secondly, there was a real concern that this would be, as then ambassador to Moscow and now CIA director Bill Burns put it, the reddest of red lines, not just for the Russian leadership, but for the Russian people. They would see this as the culmination of an aggressive NATO march to isolate and potentially crush Russia. And therefore, it is extremely sensitive politically. Thus, at the Bucharest summit, the two countries did not get what is called MAP, which is the first step to an official accession process, but rather as a SOP, as a words to simply paper over the divisions within NATO and the general unwillingness to take those countries in. The final NATO communique had words to the effect of that Ukraine and Georgia, it's their destiny, their fortune to someday become members of NATO. This is what Putin keeps on citing, but nobody took that as a policy thing. We in Washington, and the Turkish government is pretty similar, it's very large and well organized. You know, we have policies to carry out almost everything that we have any kind of idea we might want, or we've gone on record as saying we might want. There was no effort to try to get these countries into NATO. Between 2008 and 2014, and certainly not after 2014, because you had a divided country, and that flew in the face of NATO policies. So the question is, first of all, should we offer NATO membership to Turkey? Now, not to Turkey, to Ukraine. Now, this is being advocated by many. You can call them friends of Ukraine here in Washington, D.C., and these are influential. There are many experts on Ukraine, people who served there, people who know the country. But I don't think, well, I know this is not the administration's position. The problem is, and here we have these leaked documents to confirm what many of us have thought, we're facing something like a stalemate in the Ukraine war with no obvious way out, as Burhanettin just underlined, and a situation where you have a country, depending upon the statistic you use, 4 to 10 times larger than Ukraine, that is bent on, that's Russia, eventually snuffing out Ukraine as an independent, stable country at peace. How are we going to preserve long-term Ukraine's survival even after a ceasefire? This is going to require security guarantees, and I would say a security presence in Ukraine, preferably authorized by the Security Council, but there are other fallback positions that are not as good. But the main thing is to get boots on the ground. What we have seen, and Turkey can demonstrate this just like we can in Syria, where you have Turkish forces deployed. It's not important how many are American forces deployed, and there are very few Americans. Nobody crosses the line. Russia has provoked, Russia has egged on its allies, Iran and Assad, Syria, to attack these positions at times, to provoke, but there has never been any real challenge to these positions because they're secure. But the other thing is, and this is very important, Russia knows that neither Turkey nor the United States will use its positions there to threaten key Russian interests in Syria, which it begins with the Assad regime and continues to the Russian military position. Therefore, it is a balance of power as well as a stalemate on the ground. We need some, it's hard to use Syria ever as an example for anything, but it is basically an example of how you get a ceasefire that is backed by major powers who aren't going to challenge each other. We need that, but in a way that is not threatening to anybody. And making the security guarantees under NATO would be seen by the Russians as a threat. The other thing is, as a practical matter, you're not going to get 28 states in NATO to accept the membership of Ukraine. Now, in talking to Turkish officials, and I know you folks do that as well, I see no particular interest in moving to put Ukraine in NATO. That doesn't mean Turkey doesn't care very deeply about Ukraine's independence. It does, and it has proved that. It just understands that, as I think the administration does here, you have to embed Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and security inside a larger security architecture that is stable for the region and is not perceived as directly threatening to Russia. In a way, the Cold War worked that way. We maintained the line from eastern Turkey all the way to Norway, but we never challenged Russia's position east of that line, not in Budapest, not in Warsaw, not in Berlin in 1953, not in Prague in 1968. We made it clear that we were defensive. That's part of the solution. I don't want to get into details of the architecture right now, beyond saying that NATO membership, aside from the impracticability of it, would undercut any attempt to have a stable situation with Russia in the years ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this really comprehensive response to Ukraine's potential membership. And you don't see that being realistic anytime soon, from what I can gather. Kilic, you feel free to address that question as well, but for the sake of time, I wanted to turn to US-Turkey relations, how this NATO enlargement debates might impact Turkish-American relations. There have been these summits, NATO summits, where President Erdogan, President Biden came together and they discussed these issues. What is the sort of impact on the Turkish-American relations when it comes to NATO matters? You're on mute, yes.
Two things, I guess. Number one is, I think even before this war, starting from 2014, Turkish authorities, Turkish foreign policy makers were offering both Ukrainian and Russian leaders to mediate this dispute, to resolve this dispute. And I think even after the war, Turkey never recognizes the Russian accession of Crimea or other regions, and Turkey always asserted the independence and territorial integrity of Ukraine in each and every opportunity. I think Turkish position was the continuation of this war, since Turkey has been now regionally experienced, seeing Syria, seeing Iraq, and multiple different civil wars and the extended warfares in the Middle East. Turkey has been vigilant not to, at least to prevent another extended warfare that would cost the lives of the millions, that would generate a major refugee flow and generate long-term social, economic, and political problems in its region. And I think the second part was for the NATO, especially considering 2030 strategic concepts, Turkey was very much in favor of NATO taking a forward-looking approach, remaining strong militarily, being politically very much united, and having a global approach with preparing for challenges, both in terms of technology, in terms of climate, etc. So those challenges are also important for Turkey. So Turkey was supporting the 2030 concept, and in the meantime trying to resolve this dispute between, and the war, mediate the war between Ukraine and Russia. And when it comes to US-Turkey relations, and I think this has been one of the biggest challenges in the history of the relations, starting from 1916s, I assume each and every rapprochement or improvement of relations between Turkey and Soviet Union, and then in 2000s, Turkey and Russia, has been perceived as Turkey changing its access, Turkey is shifting its access, Turkey is changing its strategic orientation. And I think part of that was the perception, and that perception partly was as a result of instrumentalization of those relations by those in Washington who doesn't want the improvement of relations between Turkey and United States. And we have seen this in Sweden, Finland's case. Although there has been negotiations, although there was a memorandum of understanding in Madrid summit shortly after their intention to apply for the membership. So we are talking about the beginning of the war in February, their intention, their expression of their intention for Sweden and Finland's membership next month. And 2 months later, there was a NATO summit and there was a memorandum of understanding. President Biden was involved in this process as well. So even after that, when the countries formed a joint mechanism, Turkey, Finland, and Sweden, to resolve their differences and to meet the conditions that was put forward by Turkey, even while this process was taking place, there was reaction in some circles in Washington that Turkey is not willing these two countries to join NATO. And especially the fact that some members of the Congress were trying to put F-16, link this issue to F-16 purchase by Turkey, generated significant concern in Turkey, actually. Whether this was just an instrument by the people in the some members of the Congress, or whether this was a attempt by the US administration. So I think this, the misperception of Turkey in Washington is generating misperception in Istanbul, in Ankara, and in Turkey as well, I guess. And to resolve these problems and misperceptions is basically letting the improvement of the relations, resolving the bilateral problems between two countries, because we have seen that an issue like membership of Sweden and Finland can also impact the bilateral relations if the dispute and the disagreements between these two countries, United States and Turkey, are not resolved, and if those problems continue to exist.
Thank you very much, Kilic. So I want to turn to Professor Duran. There's a question in the Q&A. By the way, feel free to post your questions. And the question relates to what happens if CHP were to win next month in next month's elections. how that would impact the policy, Turkish policy towards Syria. This question is directed against Ambassador Jeffrey, but I want to ask you, how is the mood in Ankara? And I will also get Ambassador's response on this, but I want to hear how things are looking in Turkey. We're just a month away from the elections, and there's a very robust debate inside Turkey about the upcoming elections. How do you foresee potential changes in Turkish foreign policy after the elections, regardless of who wins, Professor Duran? And then I'll turn to the ambassador.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ustun. Well, May 14 elections in Turkey has been considered a very historical one by all, from all the sides, including the AK Party and also the CHP. Well, there will be a very competitive election between President Erdogan and Kılıçdaroğlu. Well, we can speculate about whether this election will be completed in the first round or second round, but we are all sure that in this last month, there will be more and more campaigns to get 6, 7, 8% of not decided voters, and all the politicians are appealing to them. Well, we have two scenarios. One, President Erdogan continues. Another one, CHP, Kılıçdaroğlu, comes to power. Well, Turkey's foreign policy in the past 20 years has been so much complicated by the regional and global developments, including Syria, Iraq, and now Ukraine, and Turkey's position in the Eastern Mediterranean, and also the problems between Turkey and US, Turkey and EU. There is a great accumulation of some developments and also many problems at the same time. Any government in Turkey should, of course, focus on maintaining the balance between foreign policy and security issues, between Turkey's strong position in the Western alliance, also carrying the cooperation with Russia, and also facing the global challenges and regional change of balance of power. If you look at the Saudi Arabia's position, or even India's position after the war in Ukraine, you will see that all parties are trying to diversify their foreign policies and take some issues as new areas and opportunities for cooperation with different powers. So in this environment, any case of continuation with President Erdogan, while policies would be similar, and I expect some new initiatives and to solve some problems, including the continuation of normalization policy and much more emphasis on making this strategic mechanism between Turkey and the US a strong one. But of course, as Kilic mentioned, the problems of YPG and PKK and some issues about Russian involvement in Syria, these are the big issues to be so much discussed, and we have to find some ways to cooperate. Also, the Caucasus and Central Asia would be the major areas, and also Africa for positive agenda between Turkey and the US. All of these issues could be discussed after the elections. For the opposition, their foreign policy is very weak. They say some of them, they say we could be in a position of closer to Western allies, but some of them within the opposition bloc are not sure about that. In Syria, there is such a talk withdrawing returning the Syrian refugees back, but this is not realistic. You know, these refugees, they may return only with conditions of safety, security, and honor. So that's why, unfortunately, I don't see a clear picture of what the opposition proposes after the elections in terms of foreign policy and security. This makes, of course, somehow people's understanding questionable. And of course, they have to, if they come to power, these opposition parties have to be prepared for many crises and many challenges. And these are not certain issues for the public opinion of Turkey.
Thank you. Ambassador Jeffrey, if CHP were to come to power, what do you expect the Syria policy might be, Turkey's Syria policy? We have little time, so if you can keep it a couple minutes, that would be great.
I think there will be general consistency in foreign policy because Turkey's overall interests, which include supporting Ukraine, being a strong member of NATO, but conducting somewhat independent policies towards Russia because of the economic and security relationship, geography matters, and pursuing its security in its near abroad, which includes Syria, Iraq, the PKK, the Aegean, and so forth, all will continue. The rhetoric that we see that is so irritating in Washington, particularly from President Erdogan, but not just from him, will probably go away to some degree, and that's good, particularly in managing the US Congress. But on the other hand, you'll have an inexperienced group of people, at least at the top, and that means that they may make more mistakes. So I think that Washington expects overall policies to continue along the same course, and it's prepared to deal with whoever wins.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Kilic. The last word is yours today. There's one last question about whether if there's, the war in Ukraine ends and there's peace, what would be the future scenario? Is it is there going to be some sort of Cold War? And you're free if you can address that, but also if you have any other comments, the last word is yours. Thank you.
I think it is important the end of the war, and it is not only what makes the international system more complex is not only the end of the war, but also the situation between China and United States, the uncertainty in the Middle East that is taking place right now. So there are too many uncertainties. We are not even sure if there would be a Cold War. I think we are not sure which two sides will be, which two countries would be on the side of it. I think we will see regional Cold Wars in addition to a more global rivalry between the United States and China.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for being so brief and concise in your responses and sticking to our time. I really appreciate it. What's that, Ambassador?
Now have more time.
I mean, definitely the issues are very complex, and I have today with me very thoughtful thinkers, and they were able to really make it digestible and understandable for all of us. Hope to do this event in person. This is Ramadan's, and we have guests from Turkey. Things are very busy in Turkey, so hopefully next time we do this in Washington in person or in Ankara in person. I really appreciate all of you being here and your comments. And I want to thank those who participated in this debate in our Zoom webinar, but also on social media for following us. Thank you so much, all of you, and I'll see you hopefully soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
you.
Bye-bye.